Chicago spends almost $15 million a year fighting rats. It has been named the rattiest city in America for 10 years straight. Every year, tens of thousands of people call the city to report the same problem, and every year the problem is still there. And yet, drive through certain Chicago parks after dark, and you'll find places where the rat and goose problem has quietly, measurably gotten better, without a single exterminator, without a single dollar of city budget. Researchers have been tracking this animal in Cook County for 25 years. It's the longest-running study of its kind anywhere in the world. And what they found is almost too clean to believe. In the places this predator patrols, Canada goose populations that should be exploding are barely growing at all. Rodents that should be everywhere are being hunted every single night by something the city never hired, trained, or paid for. This is the story of how Chicago's most controversial animal quietly became one of its most effective public employees and never collected a paycheck. Chicago's Bureau of Rodent Control runs on a budget of nearly $15 million a year, and that number has only grown. In 2022 alone, residents filed over 50,000 rat-related complaints. The city's own Inspector General audited the rodent program for falling behind. For 10 consecutive years, national pest control rankings have named Chicago the rattiest city in the country. None of this is from lack of effort. Streets and sanitation crews bait alleys, inspect complaints, and have expanded staffing for over a decade. And still, the rats hold their ground in the dense, food-rich corridors of the city's alleys and sewers, because that environment was practically built for them. Constant food waste, endless hiding spots, and, in the deep urban core, almost nothing hunting them. Canada geese present a quieter but similar story. In manicured parks and retention ponds across the region, goose populations have historically had the conditions to grow fast. Mowed grass, no natural predators, plenty of water. Left unchecked, a resident goose population can grow 10 to 20% a year, fast enough to turn a park into a mess of droppings and aggressive nesting birds within a few seasons. Two different animals, two different budgets, two problems. The city has spent real money trying to manage for decades. In 2000, researchers led by wildlife ecologist Stan Garrett started tracking an animal that wasn't supposed to be thriving in a major American city, the coyote. What began as an effort to understand a handful of sightings became the Cook County Coyote Project, now recognized as the largest and longest-running urban coyote study on Earth. Coyotes had been expanding into cities across North America for decades, filling a niche left open after wolves and other large predators were pushed out of the landscape a century earlier. Chicago, with its patchwork of forest preserves, rail corridors, golf courses, and green space threaded between neighborhoods, turned out to be close to ideal. Researchers estimate the Chicago metro area is now home to anywhere from several hundred to a couple thousand coyotes. Some live in forest preserves, some live behind shopping centers and industrial parks. Almost none of them are seen by the millions of people who live alongside them, because urban coyotes have adapted to be almost entirely active at night, moving through the exact hours when the city is emptiest. Nobody released these animals here. Nobody manages their numbers. They simply moved in, found a system that worked, and started hunting. Urban coyotes are opportunists, and in Chicago, opportunism means eating an enormous amount of exactly what the city is trying to get rid of. Diet studies from the Cook County Project consistently show rodents and rabbits as staple prey, alongside fruit, insects, and the occasional goose egg. In the parks and green corridors where coyotes patrol most heavily, that translates into a steady nightly pressure on rat and rabbit populations that no city crew is applying. It isn't dramatic. It isn't announced. It's just a predator doing what predators do in places where, for decades, nothing was doing it at all. This is the part of the story that's easy to romanticize and important to get right. Coyotes are not solving Chicago's citywide rat crisis. The worst rat pressure sits in dense residential alleys and underground sewer systems, environments coyotes rarely enter and where the city's paid program is still doing real, necessary work. What coyotes are doing is something narrower and still remarkable, suppressing rodent numbers specifically in the parks, preserves, and green spaces they call home, for free, every single night. The clearest evidence isn't about rats, it's about geese, and it comes from a study conducted in the Chicago area that placed cameras directly at goose nests to find out definitively what was eating the eggs. The results were stark. Coyotes were responsible for roughly 3/4 of all Canada goose nest predation recorded, somewhere between 75 and 78%. Raccoons accounted for most of the rest, but the data showed something raccoons almost never managed: getting past a goose that was actively defending her nest. Coyotes did. The population level effect was the real headline. Without predation, a suburban or urban Canada goose population can grow 10 to 20% a year, fast enough to double a park's goose numbers in under a decade. In the areas researchers studied around Chicago, with coyotes present and hunting, annual population growth dropped to just 1 to 2%. Read that gap again: 10 to 20%, down to 1 or 2. Not from a culling program, not from egg-addling crews, not from a fence or a permit or a line item in a city budget. From an animal that showed up on its own and started eating eggs it was never assigned to eat. Researchers now describe it plainly. Coyotes are functioning as biocontrol for one of the region's most persistent nuisance species. The mechanism nobody planned turned out to be more effective than most of the mechanisms somebody did. None of this happens by accident of temperament. Urban coyotes in Chicago have shifted their entire daily rhythm to avoid humans, becoming almost exclusively nocturnal in developed areas even though their rural relatives are active around the clock. They've learned to read traffic patterns, to use rail lines and utility corridors as travel routes, to den in overgrown lots and forest preserve edges within sight of office parks. That adaptability is exactly why the research keeps running after 25 years. Collared coyotes have been track denning within a few miles of the loop, raising pups within earshot of highways, and returning to the same hunting grounds. Parks, cemeteries, golf courses, drainage corridors, night after night. These are the same green spaces where geese nest and where rodent populations concentrate around food waste and cover. The coyote didn't need an introduction program, a funding cycle, or a 5-year plan. It needed the city to keep leaving small slices of habitat connected to each other, and it built the rest of the system itself. This isn't a story where a wild animal single-handedly rescued a city, and it shouldn't be sold as one. Chicago is still, by outside rankings, the rattiest city in America. The core of that problem lives in alleys and underground infrastructure that coyotes rarely touch, and the city's rodent control budget is still doing work that has to keep happening regardless. Coyotes also come with real trade-offs: conflicts with off-leash pets, public anxiety in neighborhoods unused to wildlife, and the occasional bold individual that loses its fear of people and has to be managed. None of that disappears just because the ecology is working in the city's favor elsewhere. What the research does show, cleanly and repeatedly, is that in the specific spaces coyotes occupy, they are quietly performing pest control the city never asked for and never has to pay for. Compare the two efforts side by side. One is a $15 million a year city bureau, expanding staff, auditing itself, and still losing ground in the alleys and sewers it was built to manage. The other is an animal that moved into the metro area on its own, was never budgeted, never trained, and never asked to do anything. And in the parks and green corridors it patrols, is holding down the exact populations the city spends real money trying to control elsewhere. Somewhere in a Chicago forest preserve tonight, a coyote is working a familiar route along a drainage ditch, checking the same denning sites it has used for years, doing exactly what its collared, tracked, 25-year studied population has always done after dark. No contract was signed, no budget was approved. The animal that quietly took a bite out of two of Chicago's most stubborn wildlife problems was never hired to solve either one. It just moved in and started working. If stories like this are your thing, hit subscribe and drop a like. There's a lot more of nature quietly doing the job nobody planned for.